Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction, tech, or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. This feels stupid, me saying I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I am Matthew Cutler-Welsh, and I am with, in the room, Ilka and Mary. And Zach, you guys want to say hello?
Yeah, please.
Hi, Matthew. Hello, it's nice to see you in person.
It's great. And, all of us, and you too, Zach.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
We have to acknowledge that we are in the same room together. And I kind of just assumed that I was the only person that hadn't met people physically. I hadn't really connected the dots there.
Yeah, right.
It was the first time for a lot of us.
Exactly. We have the whole Passive House Accelerator team here for the first time, So we've been collaborating with each other online for years, and now we get to actually see each other in 3 dimensions.
And here being Chicago, where none of us are from. but here we are at FierceCon, and it's been awesome. So I feel very fortunate to be here and appreciative of the accelerator, which is also probably a good time to thank people who have helped getting us here.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I mean, there are a lot of thank yous. You're here from New Zealand thanks to support from StoCorp and Zola Windows, who are underwriting all of the interviews that you and Mary have been doing at the conference itself. So we have a lot of content that we've captured over the last couple of days for the podcast that we're going to be metering out, I think, probably daily for a while in November. So get ready, everybody. You're going to get completely overwhelmed. We also tonight we'll have this after party that's the FIAS Alliance and Passive House Accelerator after party, and that is being made possible by support from 475 High Performance Building Supply, Inotech Windows and Doors, Icon Windows and Doors, Partel, Proseco, and Source 2050. So that's just this event, and then we also need to thank the sponsors that make the podcast possible.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna do that too. Thank you so much to our founding sponsors: 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxting Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors, and a brand new champion sponsor, Intelligent Membranes, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. It's great to catch up with some of those people in real life as well. And we'll be putting in some content out, maybe some videos, sharing some of the great products and the people as well behind those brands. It was really good fun to meet them. All right, but on our regular schedule, Ilka and Mary, you've been doing some great work, heading out and talking to people outside of this conference, but also related to this conference. So it's great that we can bring those two together. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this week's interview?
So Kim Dupont-Madinier is who we spoke with, and she is principal of Atelier Dupont-Madinier, and she just recently started her own business, and she's a designer who is working to incorporate textiles into architecture.
Great. Well, let's get into the interview and we'll have a quick catch up afterwards. Welcome, Kim Dupont-Madinier, principal of Atelier Dupont-Madinier. We're excited to have you here today. And before we talk about your work that you're doing now at the Atelier, let's talk about your background a little bit. I understand you went to RISD and you were involved in a very interesting project there.
Sure. So my background is in fine art and architecture, and I think what's ironic is that I was convinced when going to RISD that I would never study architecture. But in my first year, I had this amazing professor in my 3D studio who was an architect. And I remember loving her class. She was so well-spoken, so cultured, so curious. And I asked her one day, for her advice, because I told her I had all these prejudices about architecture and that it was just flat planes and straight lines. And she responded in the most perfect way possible, which I've never forgotten since, which was, well, there's so much you can do with a line. And I think since then, that's really what began my journey in architecture with textiles and seeking to innovate with textiles in, unique and interesting ways. So when I was 21, I had the opportunity to build the house of my dreams. And it was through the Solar Decathlon initiative. And in that year, it took place in France, in Versailles, in the gardens of Versailles. And it was an amazing opportunity because I was 19 when we started the project, and it enabled us to design, build, and fundraise our own solar-powered home. And it was a remarkable experience as far as undergraduate educations go, because we were an international team, collaborating with professionals and, working with these really advanced materials and developing these new system and assembly designs to challenge traditional notions of passive house design. And we ultimately ended up making our house out of textiles because we wanted to see how we could come up with something new and innovative. And as I mentioned earlier, challenge traditional notions of passive house design, which is often can be perceived to be maybe more closed and more of a box-like shape. And so we used textiles to expand and see what we could come up with as a result.
Can you tell us a little bit about what textiles you used in the building envelope?
Sure. So some of the textiles we used were, just standard building materials that are used today. The exterior membrane was a fiberglass membrane that was pre-stretched and coated in a PTFE mixture, and the interior of the building envelope was using standard vapor barrier and air barrier membrane, and then we had a fire-rated interior textile finish on the interior of the house that was M1 rated because it needed to meet the code requirements for public buildings.
So just for those who don't know what PTFE is, what is that again?
PTFE is basically, the generic name is Teflon, maybe. So it's a very useful material when it comes to being water resistant and mold resistant and dirt resistant. However, there's challenges with it in terms of biodegradability and its impact on the environment for sure.
So, and this project really set you up for another journey that you took later on, right? Mm-hmm. And this is actually how I got connected to you, because we're looking at kind of broader passive house adaptation across the world. And you mm-hmm. picked a very, very interesting location to build a passive house. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, The location I picked was Mongolia. And part of the reason why I chose to go there was actually when we had built our first passive textile house at the Solar Decathlon in Versailles. Some of the feedback from the judges was that we were not solving a social need. So that grew me to question, okay, well, where could we apply this building technology, and where would an energy efficient textile house be the most impactful? And when I started doing research, I found that actually the capital of Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, is the most polluted capital in the world today. And the reason for that is that because the nomads are migrating to the city, and they're settling around the city with their yurts. They're known as a yurt in the West, but the correct Mongolian term is a ger, which is their vernacular housing typology that's made out of textiles. And the reason why the city is so polluted is that instead of these herders, instead of burning animal dung like they used to, they're now burning coal to heat their homes. And because it's -40 outside, people are burning coal 4 times a day just to stay warm. So the objective was to apply the know-how that we had developed with this initial project to the Mongolian ger, and specifically work with local partners to ultimately offer up the technology to them, and then see how the customers and the local partners that I developed on the ground wanted to adapt the technology so that it was best suited to their local needs.
And what did you use as the materials for both the exterior envelope and the interior finish on the gers? And also, can you talk a little bit about how you dealt with air tightness in the ger?
Sure. So the materials that I used for the passive ger was an EPDM membrane, and it was just patterned and welded differently. And then again, standard air barrier and vapor barrier membranes, and then different textile finish on the interior. In terms of air tightness, so there was different, details that we had developed in order to basically like fold over the membrane in certain areas to seal it, right, and tape it down and to hard materials, right, so that there was no airflow. And I think mostly it was about maintaining a continuous insulation, strip of insulation throughout the ger. I'll confess, there was a lot of challenges in terms of building that project. So we never had the opportunity to get it, passive house certified and do an blower door test. So I don't actually have the numbers today in terms of what the air tightness is on that house.
Can we step back and just look at the vernacular a little bit? Like, how did you change it to meet like modern life, and what was important to basically carry over from the original ger design?
So that's a great question. So actually, and this was one of my favorite parts of the project. So I spent actually the first 3 months in Mongolia really studying the local culture, and I actually lived in these non-formal urban areas for a month in December because I really wanted to understand what the living conditions were like, and understand how they lived in a ger today in a city context, right? So I stayed with one family 1 week at a time, and then I would go around and interview other families in the neighborhood. And that enabled me to kind of gather general data about, day-to-day activities, how people are using the space, what people's financial situation was. So I could figure out also how to target the design from a budget perspective. And then from there, what I did is, as I started developing concept designs, I would, based off of that information, I would go back into the community and get their feedback again. So it was overall, I think initially there was about 7 different concept designs that I came up with, which got narrowed down to 2 different ones, which then got developed into, more advanced kind of design development documents. And then the customer ended up picking the passive GARE design that you see today. So some of the things that I changed in the space specifically was that, and it's very important also to ask for permission, because it is a vernacular housing typology, and there's aspects of the home that actually have a symbolic meaning, which is beautiful. The 2 pillars that hold up the ton, which is the oculus at the top of the GARE at the top, they represent the man and the woman of the household. So some families, if they're more traditional, they don't want to remove that, even if you can compensate for it structurally in other ways. But some families, don't care and don't necessarily have a connection to that theory or that concept, right? So what we did was we removed those 2 pillars, and then we also added a skylight there. We renovated basically the side of the GARE. So traditionally what happens is today is, in addition to having the GARE itself, people would have these like wooden sheds attached to the entrance. And it helps basically because you store your coal in that entrance, and then you also can start taking off your clothes and, shoes and jackets before you actually enter into the GARE. So what we did is we enlarged that space and ultimately added a bathroom with, plumbing and a working kitchen as well. And I think what's interesting about that was that culturally, what I learned there is that people are, they really disliked the idea of having the bathroom inside the house, even if it was in a, Western style, like enclosed, properly space with proper plumbing, because it's just, from a sanitary perspective, it's just seen as like not good, not unpleasant. And then I think what was also particularly interesting was that the proportions of the GARE needed to stay the same no matter what. So in order for us to, meaning from the outside, so in order for us to, but people did want more ceiling height, because it's actually about only like 5 feet tall on the edges. So you usually end up being hunched over. So what we did to kind of, respect both desires is that we dug the GARE deep into the ground, so that it ultimately added ceiling height and enabled people to, enjoy more space while respecting what the proportions needed to look like from the exterior. And then we added a few additional windows and things like that as well.
So you just mentioned taking off clothes. That, can you talk a little bit more about the climate? Because it's an extreme climate in Mongolia.
Yeah. Yeah, so Mongolia is fascinating. It is -40 in the wintertime, which is where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet. And to give you an idea of how cold it is, if you take off your gloves, and if you are, you try to answer a phone, or you try to take a picture, it takes, and I'm not kidding, only 5 seconds for you to start to feel the pain in terms of the cold moving through your fingers. Your electronics don't work. But fortunately, it's a very dry climate. So the moisture, the cold doesn't penetrate you the same way like it would, in Boston, for example, when it gets cold, and the temperatures aren't as low. So that's fortunate. But I think one thing that's amazing too is that because it's such an extreme climate, actually in the Mongolian steppe, there's barely any trees. So when you're horseback riding or, riding on a motorcycle in the countryside, it's so scenic because there's just these rolling hills that go for miles and miles. And it feels to me like you're really on another planet, which I love.
And in the summer, how hot does it get? Like, do you have to worry about cooling?
I mean, there's definitely people don't use air conditioning unless you're like in a Western style building potentially, but even then it's pretty rare. The traditional Gare itself actually has like a natural ventilation mechanism where if you just roll up the bottom layers of it, it creates a natural airflow, right, between the tone and the bottom, so it circulates air pretty nicely. But it doesn't get, unless you're in the Gobi Desert, the heat in the summertime is not unbearable.
How did you, in the passive Gare, sort of adapt natural ventilation to it, or how did you incorporate that into your design?
So we had a south-facing window and then a skylight at the top, and they could open basically both. So it would create the same effect, except just with, double glazed windows this time.
So going back to the coldness, how thick were your walls at the end with all the insulation? What kind of R value did you look at?
I think it was still R50 or R60. I would need to look at the drawings again. It's been a while, but yeah, I mean, it was densely packed for sure.
So what kind of insulation did you use?
So we were very fortunate. We used a Mongol basalt wool, which is a type of local rock wool that a local Mongolian building materials supplier supplied.
And then in terms of systems, so I mean, everything is electric, right? Because you wanted to get away from the coal. Mm-hmm. So what kind of systems did you use and what was available to you in Mongolia?
So we actually looked at LPG gas systems at one point, but there's actually a lot of fear around that. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in terms of how to use it, and I think people were very afraid that the building would blow up. So we ended up just sticking to like electrical heating systems. We specifically specified actually a heat pump. Sorry. And it was designed specifically to work for -40 temperatures. So that was perfect. And it was actually a professor at Berkeley who identified that this system could work for some other initiative that was going on in Mongolia. So we were lucky to be able to leverage that knowledge for our project as well. And then for the bathroom, the fresh water would be supplied by a local truck that kind of does rounds in the neighborhood and will deliver fresh water. And then there was a underground plumbing system.
How about ventilation? Did you have mechanical ventilation?
Yes, we did. And it wasn't, when it was initially installed, it was installed backwards. So that was part of the repairs that we had to work on in the second round.
And so I'm curious about the family that you built the GER for. And did you have to educate them in how to use like a mechanical system, for example, because that's for sure not something that they had in their gear before?
That's a great question. They were a young couple and they're very, thrifty is not the right word, fast to learn, I guess I would say. Tuya and Munkdava both worked and they're they had lived in like Western style homes and stuff like that. So it wasn't, or worked in Western style buildings. So it wasn't like the technology was that foreign that they didn't understand. It was difficult for them to like conceptually understand. I think it was just a question of like, reading the manual, like you and I would need to do if we bought some new mechanical equipment kind of thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then how did you connect to them, and who actually paid for the premium of Passive House?
When you say the premium of the Passive House, what do you mean?
Well, if they were about to build a new GER or buy one, that would have been probably a little less expensive than building a Passive House GER,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
So was there someone that came up with the extra cost, or did they just kind of cover it because they just believed in it?
So they paid for about a third of the cost of the project. And they were initially planning on building their own Western style home, but it would have taken them, 3 to 5 years, because there's like a process that some families would do, where they would like buy the materials a little bit at a time over time, and then start to assemble the building themselves, just like the man and the wife and maybe some family members as well, which is actually fascinating. So that was one of my favorite things about Mongolia, was that because the Mongolian ger is a vernacular housing typology, and it's one that everyone lived in at one point, everyone knows how to build their own home. And for me, that was such a beautiful like concept and also thing to observe, because it was just, it's something that is not practiced today in our, Western style world. And because of that comfort with, building a home, there was very little fear around trying to build a Western style home correctly, but it was creating all these problems actually locally in terms of energy consumption, because people were now building bigger homes and burning more coal in those bigger homes, and they were worse in terms of insulation, especially insulation to space ratio. So what happened is that they would have actually spent a lot more money building a Western style home, and it would have taken them longer to build a Western style home over a certain period of time, over that like 3 to 5 year period of time. So I was able to basically deliver them a solution that was, more immediate, less costly for them, and then also, they didn't have to do any work, which was great. So, and then for the rest, obviously, I did the fundraising for the rest of the cost for the project, for sure.
Well, lucky them. That's great. I hope that other families get to help from all the work that you did. And then eventually you left Mongolia and came to work back in the United States for Saint-Gobain. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what were you doing there?
So at Saint-Gobain, I was leading their offsite construction initiative between Certainteed and Unity Homes. And it was an amazing project. I learned a lot about our product portfolio and how we need to adapt our product portfolio for prefab construction. I think, though, that ultimately I learned that the intention that I had in terms of, working for them was to understand from a global perspective of how the prefab industry is evolving and manufacturing at scale. But I think what I ultimately learned is that I really value working with certain kinds of materials, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get over the fact that I just hate vinyl siding.
But were there lessons there in terms of how the housing industry here is ready or able to absorb prefabrication as a method of building?
I definitely think there is. I think that it's a very clear trend and that prefab is the way of the future. And I think that, the technical know-how that's needed to assemble a building in an efficient and sustainable way is being lost. And, not because it's anyone's fault. It's just like the trades and craft systems that used to be at play are no longer as strong as they once were. And, to focus on manufacturing and prefab construction is really important in order for us to make the changes that we need to make from a sustainability perspective for the future in terms of carbon reduction, and also just quality execution. So I think, the challenge is that there's so many different kind of players along the value chain. So it's just a question of how will businesses evolve and adapt so that there will be, maybe more architects seeking out prefab builders or manufacturers who are selling them system and assembly designs that they can design with, or maybe it's just, and we looked at tons of other prefab companies today globally who are offering, that kind of service. Some prefab companies are volumetric and it's only that one kind of design that they offer. Some are panelized and some are, offering a kit of parts. There's just a wide range, and some are offering a turnkey service. So I think it's definitely growing, and I think it was really productive from the learnings on that front as well. Yeah, for sure, especially for the commodities industry.
So, but now moving forward, you're actually connecting back to your passion of textiles, correct? And you have actually a deep-rooted family history in that. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you are trying to do now moving forward?
Sure, absolutely. So I think I'm very fortunate because I've been able to find my passion young. And when I was younger, I always loved textiles and I would draw them, study them. And the first projects that I made in architecture were textile based as well. And so now and obviously the two homes that we've just talked about are also textile based. So I've realized after a lot of, I guess you could say soul searching, that it really is my life's passion, and that the only way to do it is by starting my own company. And so the company I founded, Atelier Dupont-Madinier, really is called that for a few reasons. So historically, my family on the Dupont-Madinier side, my father's side, my grandfather, the Dupont side, had his own textile mill, which was a commodity textiles company. And then my grandmother, which was the Madinier side, also had her own textiles mill, which was more of a luxury item. They produced silk. And so I just found that really beautiful because their organizations were founded in 1825 and 1842, I believe. And to know that there is that kind of lineage there, I think is very strong. So it's in some ways like an ode to them, to name the company after them, and bring back some of the artisanal skills that they developed in their time. And then the goal is to combine that craftsmanship and know-how with the advanced materials that we have available to us today. And for me, it's such a gift because I feel like it's an opportunity for me to, continue to build these beautiful structures that have such a distinct, haptic quality to them. The construction process is silent. The when people enter the building, it's amazing because they start to pet the walls and they like will naturally go silent. And you have this very kind of clear sense of like groundedness and like presence in the space. And for me, it warms my heart, for lack of a better word, because it's like, it's what you yearn for, I feel like, as an architect, to create a space that gives people that sense of, what I guess, like beyond just well-being, but like that sense of being enveloped in such a unique kind of condition. The opportunity here is to leverage this material and explore with it and learn from it, right? Like that's one of the best parts of the design process is you can iterate upon it and have almost like have it teach you what it wants to do. And I think that's where it's exciting because architecturally we can come up with new forms and designs that, just like with Textile House and the Passive Gear, we would have never been able to come up with. I think I said we had a book for Textile House, and I think one of the first things that I said in the book was, it's about reinventing our material imagination of the built environment. And for me, that's like true to my core. And I think that's really what energizes me as an individual. And I think that's actually where I produce my best work and I'm able to, best please people too.
And are you planning to incorporate passive design principles into the structures that you're designing? Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's something that's also fundamental to what we're doing from the perspective that I worked for a long time on the manufacturing side, and we would speak with architects and designers and talk about LEED and all these other standards that people use to qualify as sustainable. But I guess to my knowing so much that I know now about, energy efficiency and sustainability, I just feel like passive house design is kind of non-negotiable for me because of the energy savings that come with that. It's something that I think also just from a comfort perspective is so enjoyable.
It's great to combine the comfort of living in a draft-free environment with the kind of emotional comfort or the sensorial comfort of living with textiles. I think would be a great combination.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would like to switch topics real quick to what was it like as a woman to work in Mongolia and then also work within the kind of manufacturing world?
Yeah, so I loved my year in Mongolia. I mean, it was I had zero expectations. I knew 2 people by email when I arrived, and by the end, I was able to design, build, and fundraise the whole team. And I think it was so perfect because there were so many things that happened where I was such an oddity to people when I arrived that they just kind of didn't know what to do with me. So a few things played in my favor. My first name's Kim, right? And so when I would go into business meetings and, I would introduce myself via email and then eventually meet someone in person, they would meet me and often they would be like, oh, I thought you were a, Korean professor, male professor. So there was an element of surprise there, which was fun and unexpected for me too. And then I think also, when I arrived, no one wanted to make Gers energy efficient. Their thought was that this is a house that is meant for the countryside and is a thing of the past. We shouldn't be trying to modernize it. It doesn't make sense. But the NGO I was partnered with had that mission. And so I stuck to it, even though everyone else was saying no. And so I think that helped. And also the fact that I didn't speak Mongolian helped. Like, I mean, I learned Mongolian eventually while I was there, like polite Mongolian to get around and stuff. But it's so freeing because it just made me so much more focused on my goal. And so even if people, which they were at times, I'm sure of it, were said bad things or, I don't know what, I couldn't know, right? Because I just didn't understand. So that was really a gift too, right? It just gave me so much clarity and focus on that front. And, by the end of it, when, we had our going away party and stuff, or celebration party, so many people congratulated me because they were surprised I could even pull it off. So that was great. I think as far as working, and I think the last thing I would say is that it really gave me such a strong conviction for the potential of human beings and what we can accomplish when we arrive. Because I was the only American person on the team, and it was ultimately ended up being a completely Mongolian team. And what happened is that, it accomplishing so much within such a short amount of time, and the total project, I think costing a total of maybe $55,000, is amazing that we were able to accomplish so much. So it gave me such faith in human beings and the good that we can accomplish together. And I think what happened was that when I moved back to the US and started working in the manufacturing industry, I think I was very, I came with a very open heart and very eager to, collaborate in a fluid way. And I think what I realized was that it just isn't, the manufacturing industry wasn't suited for that. And it was disappointing because, I probably had 3 or 4 times the budget than what I had in Mongolia, and I accomplished, 3 times as less. And I think that, there's so much potential, like a company of 100,000 employees, to, really, really profoundly change the world and, act as a united front and push. And I just ultimately realized that the only way I was going to be able to do it was by starting my own company. And I think for me, my number one value is agency. And I really value, open partnerships, and, giving people the freedom to excel. I think that's where I'm really grateful because I have so much experience today that I know with absolute confidence of how the kind of culture that I want to create in my organization, because ultimately culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if you set the tone for the kind of place you want to work at and how you want, everyone to get along and work well together, I think you can achieve so much. I mean, it's exceptional without a doubt.
Congratulations on being able to create your own firm. And I'm excited to see what comes out of it, as I'm sure you are too.
Yeah, and thank you for your time to talk to us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be considered, and I'm happy that these projects are being seen, and I hope it encourages more people to do the same.
Well, thank you, Mary and Ilka. I did just attend a session that you hosted, Ilka, and I understand there's some common threads common to this interview, but also some of the theme of a lot of both of your work, which I think is super valuable in looking at diversity and looking at the global influence of not just passive house but high performance buildings. So I'm going to hand over to you both, because you've got some thoughts, comments on your chat.
Well, I just want to start off with noting that Kim's journey really began with her participation as a college student in the Solar Decathlon EU, which is the same as the Solar Decathlon US, but there's obviously many more European college teams that participate. And she and her team created the textile house, which did indeed employ fabric as the building material, both on the inside and the outside, and which is just a really great concept, very innovative, and it was, integrated. That beginning sort of really set her off on her career trend. So.
Yeah, and the Solar Decathlon, for those that haven't heard of it before, that's a design competition. And there are 10 challenges that they have to do?
Yes, the challenges have shifted a little over the years, but it's only college teams that participate.
Yeah.
And basically they spend pretty much a year designing and building a building, and then they have to disassemble it and reassemble it. Although COVID changed that a little bit, but that's typically what they would do, reassemble it at a competition site, and they get judged on 10 challenges.
Yeah. How about you, Claire? What stood out for you in that chat?
Well, I think, so you mentioned that we just kind of came out of a session, and that session was here at VSCon, and that session was really important to me because it was about looking at Passive House in a global context and not just within the US. And that's actually how I connected to Kim, because I knew that she did this Passive House or Passive House inspired GER in Mongolia. And the interesting thing for me, or what was so important, is that she really picked up the local, just kind of vernacular architecture, and it happens to be very much like the Solar Decathlon, where you had to originally the GER is something that was for traveling, farmers or hunters, and so they had to assemble and disassemble their home the whole time.
These are nomadic tribes, right? So they move from one location to the other and take everything with them.
Yeah. So and just kind of taking that idea and turning it into something that is current. I think that's really important and amazing to see.
Yeah, I really like that idea of taking what is valuable from a native vernacular, because that has emerged for a reason, usually to serve a purpose in a particular location. So it doesn't make sense to just disregard hundreds or, in some cases, thousands of years of evolution of a design concept to fit in with the local environment, and just assume with our Western kind of perception that we always know better. Is that what was there on a technical level? Is there any learning that you take from her journey?
Well, I think just looking at what's available there, definitely, like locally. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing she talked about was looking at, cost, and then combining that with looking at what's available and turning into resources that she had there in terms of like these milk cartons that she turned into insulation to use for, this Passive House GER. It was just really inspiring.
Yeah.
And, something that we can definitely learn from, to look more locally in general.
And I guess on the flip side of learning from all that experience is also experimentation and the realization that not everything's going to work, right? Because not everything did work,
Yes.
but so it's a bit of trial and error still to figure out new solutions to new problems.
And another really great thing, I think, which isn't always possible, but that her Fulbright grant gave her a chance to be. I think she was there for 2 months before. Just gathering information about what was important to families, about the layout of the GER and what was and the composition of the GER, and I think that's so critical as we're talking about local vernacular, unless you understand it. But in your session where you were had people from all over globally. Most of them lived in that culture, so they understood what were priorities, right?
Yeah. Most of them were from within the country, but we did interview a couple of others that basically just kind of went into another country and tried to do passive house buildings there. But typically, they did really do their research in terms of vernacular architecture or what is common there. And I thought what was interesting too is that there are certain things that you kind of solve differently architecturally or like for example, there was someone in Colombia and he designed the passive house where he had the whole laundry room outside the envelope. So that's something that's very climate specific, and that's something that we in a colder climate can't really do. But in a warmer climate, where typically you're kind of thinking passive house might not work as well, or there are all these preconceptions, I feel like you can look at it as a opportunity just to kind of develop it differently.
I was just talking to Ryan from Fierce about a project they're doing in Houston, Texas, and that also led on to the fact that that's where the next year's Fierce is going to be, so hopefully catch up there. But that similar conversation in a more kind of I guess local to the US experience, that they're struggling with designing in pretty warm climate. I mean, it gets cold there as well, but it gets very, very hot. So figuring out how to do passive house. And what we were talking about was that some of the ideas that you start off with, you kind of got to not necessarily throw out the window, but just put aside things like compact design or the fact that your slab must be insulated from the ground, because it turns out that in that situation it's better for the slab not to be insulated from the ground. So yeah, it's that coming back to the idea of vernacular architecture, and I think the thing I like about that approach is saying the ability to set some of those preconceptions aside and say what is going to be the best solution for this particular environment, but still maintaining the performance criteria, but maybe just achieving that in a possibly unexpected way.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Anything else, Mary?
Well, just again, going back to her Mongolia project, I think the GER she ended up building, they used a heat pump that was produced in China. And it just makes me think about conversations I've had here at FIAS about how the technology that you have available to you really changes what you can do or what you can't do. I mean, because China's not that far from, Mongolia and China, they're neighbors, and so they could get the heat pump for a reasonable cost.
Yeah, right.
Other building materials, they can't get there for a reasonable cost. So it does a little bit shape what they can or can't do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody here, Michael Hindle, who works in hot and humid climates again, and he was talking about, this just getting the energy recovery ventilator that can do a summer bypass, and how
Yes.
revolutionary that was for, comfort in really hot and humid climates here in the U.S.,
Well, I have that in my place in Auckland.
That's great.
Around about this time of year, because it's spring for me. I would be turning that on, the summer bypass, and basically leaving it on until May. So, yeah, different strokes for different environments.
Yeah.
Thank you, as always. Fantastic stuff to have, great conversation. Really appreciate, like I said at the outset, to keep getting that diversity piece, which I think is really important, that you're still actively seeking that out and going and finding those people that are doing things in a different part of the world, because we all benefit from having that diversity.
And all those interviews are going to be available to watch on the Passive House Accelerator website.
Absolutely.
So excited. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you both. We've got some stuff coming up.
We do.
This week?
Yeah, so this week we have an episode of Passive House Accelerator Live. It'll be a project showcase this time, and it's going to be on the Winthrop Center. So it's called Winthrop Center, Leading an Evolution in Office Space. The Winthrop Center is that really big Passive House office tower going up in Boston right now, and we'll be joined by Kathy McNeil, who is a principal at MP Boston, the developer of the project. I got a chance to see her in action when she was leading a project tour a few months ago at the building for attendees of the Passive House Networks conference. And she's amazing, and the building's amazing. So please join us for that on Wednesday for us in North America. And by next week, it'll be Thursday for you.
It will be.
Zealand.
It will be.
You might be a little weary-eyed. So I know that there are other events going on. We'll include a link to our newsletter or our weekend preview article that has information about everything that's coming up, Passive House and otherwise, I guess, high performance building wise, in the show notes.
Yep, make sure you sign up for that. As always, check out all the great resources, and there'll be a lot more, I think, in the coming weeks as we put up some of the content.
Yeah.
Video, audio, hoping for some articles from Mary, and that great magazine.
Yeah, we
that just came out.
Release the magazine that Mary and Jay Fox and the team, Leanne Maxwell designed it, and great team effort, and a beautiful printed magazine.
Yeah.
It's been fun to share that.
But people can find that digitally as well, right?
Yes, it'll be on the website, and it's really another great publication.
After 3 years, it's really exciting to have print copies available.
Physical copy. Yeah. Well, it's also exciting to be together, sitting around a table in a room physically. Sure so we'll have to do this again sometime.
We'll have to come to New Zealand.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. All righty, thanks everyone. We'll be back again next week, and also look out for those bonus episodes of Passive House Podcast.